Hey, hey.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, you're clipping.
Oh, okay.
Michael has audio problems. Is something when we start the show, something happens. I don't know what it is.
I'll just turn the gain down. We're good.
It's fine before the show, but
Yeah.
as soon as you go live, something flips. Sorry about that. Apologies to the audience for dealing with technical issues off the bat, but we have a lot to talk about for sure. A lot going on. A lot of interesting things and some depressing things. I've been actually dealing today with some depression about politics, just the things that we're going to talk about. I mean, I don't know if what do you want to start with, but this.
Can I be your therapist? Can you be more?
Please.
Yeah. Be more accurate about your depression. Is it feelings of hopelessness? Is it feelings of futility? What is it?
Well, my mommy left me and never came back, so I'm pretty sad about that. Well, besides my mother leaving me, hey mom. When I was 5 years old. No,
my mama left me the day before she had me. Said she hit the road and never once looked back.
It's actually it's actually relevant, and thank you for that. It's relevant to actually bring up my mother because the first political protests I ever went to, she took me there when I was like 5 years old. I was marching with the farm workers with Cesar Chavez out in the fields of California here, and went to lots of political rallies and protests when I was a kid because my parents, as a lot of people know, were professional revolutionaries, and I mean that. They got jobs in steel mills, and my mother was a secretary, and my stepfather was also a truck driver, all to organize the proletariat for a socialist revolution, which is what like the hardcore Marxists used to do. I think some of them still do it. And I don't know if you're aware, but they failed in that project. But they devoted about a decade of their lives to getting these working class jobs and then trying to convince their fellow workers to become socialists. But so this was, after the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War ended when I was 10. But there were a lot more protests and some anti-war protests. So I went to anti-war protests all through my youth. And
quick.
Yeah.
If you thought getting these workers to read socialism was tough, now we're going to try to get them to read queer theory. So that's going to work out.
I know, boy. I've been watching today I spent some time watching some leftists who were criticizing the rally that we're about to talk about. It's depressing. Anyway, and they were talking about the need to like talk to black folk about queer issues and trans people. I'm like, yeah, be my guest. Good luck with that. So yeah, it was kind of my first political feeling was about war, the Vietnam War, when I was a kid, and then later on nuclear war. And I kind of joined the anti-nuke movement as soon as I could when I was a very young adult. And, it's just been the issue for me forever. But so I've been to many anti-war rallies. Every single one of them is stone cold depressing. And this one that just happened last Sunday, the Rage Against the War Machine rally, is no different. I watched the whole thing. I know many people who spoke there. I very much respect those people, and I agree with them on most things. So it's not about them. It's not about the specific speeches so much, but just the whole, the way it went down. And then, I mean, they had Russian flag. There were people who brought Russian flags. Not a lot. There were like 5 or 6 Russian flags, but that's enough. And of course, one asshole put the Russian flag right behind the speakers. So like Max Blumenthal's like speaking right in front of this fucking Russian flag hanging over his head. And
well, here's the thing: at rallies like that, if that's the visual, chances are that's probably a Fed.
Well, Max actually addressed this directly on the Gray Zone, or Jimmy Dore. I think it was Jimmy Dore actually, just today or yesterday. He's done research into it. He thinks he knows who it is. It's actually apparently, according to Max, is most likely this guy who works for RT. One of the journalists there. He's like a hardcore, true pro-Russian type. Might have been a Fed. I mean, certainly, the Feds are going to use this if they need to. I mean, the thing is, only about 1,000 people showed up to this rally, and there's been almost no media coverage of it. There's been a little attempt to smear it. Interestingly, before the rally happened, it was nonstop smearing for weeks around various issues, mostly coming from the left, by the way. The left did not like that these good anti-war lefties were hanging out with racists. Of course, it was chock full of racists and white supremacists, and announced from the stage that they were supporting the return to segregation and then slavery. No, I mean, it's all typical nonsense from the left, people talked about Code Pink is maybe certainly one of the most famous, influential anti-war groups in recent years. And they boycotted it, and they didn't allow their leader, Medea Benjamin, who's like one of the most famous anti-war protesters around, to attend it or to speak there. They said, the staff of Code Pink said that they felt unsafe at a rally with members of the Mises Caucus of the Libertarian Party. Because
Did they call out the Mises Caucus by name?
Oh yeah, the Mises Caucus has gotten singled out repeatedly. They've actually been the main target of people on the left. So apparently, if you call for deregulation, if you call for the end of government regulation of race relations, you are threatening the bodies of Black folk, is exactly what has been said.
Yeah. Real quick, can somebody in the chat look up what Ludwig van Mises was doing during World War II? I think he might have been a Nazi. I'm not sure. But what was Ludwig van Mises up to?
Yeah, he was very upset about the language that Hitler was using about Jews, because Mises was a Jew, and he just didn't appreciate that really, really harsh rhetoric that Hitler was using about Jews. He didn't. It was about the words, and about the feelings, and Mises was quite upset about that. And I don't recall him having much else to say about Nazism. But yeah. So sort of typical pathetic left-wing stuff, anti-coalition building, this sort of purist stuff, and this clearly, prioritizing cultural and identity issues over things like nuclear war. So the Rage Against the War Machine rally, for those who don't know, was a joint production of the Libertarian Party, which is now controlled by the Mises Caucus, and this group called the People's Party, which I don't know much about it at all, but I guess it's sort of vaguely left-wing in some way or another, but sort of, I guess, dissident. But they got together a list of speakers that was pretty impressive, that represent a pretty broad array of political positions. So there were Ron Paul spoke, Scott Horton spoke, Angela McArdle spoke. Those are the libertarians. And then they had Max Blumenthal, who's a socialist, and they had
Roger Waters of Pink Floyd.
Roger Waters, there you go, who's apparently like a terrible human being now. I just have been finding this out lately. In fact, it's a friend of mine who's not in politics, just said, "Hey, what's up with this Roger Waters guy? I just got some email saying that he's an anti-Semite." And I was like, "Oh, is that what he is now?"
Look up Roger Waters' dad and his position on World War II.
Really? Yeah, right. Did his dad die in the war?
I think so, yeah. Well, I don't know exactly, but a lot of his angst is from his dad dying in the war effort.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure. And he's very likely to have fought in it. That's for sure. Yeah. So there was a lot of smearing of the libertarians who were part of this beforehand. And there was and then also smearing of Jimmy Dore and Max and others who, for allegedly being pro-Russian. I don't think that's really fair with Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore. It is totally fair with Scott Ritter, who was criticized heavily beforehand and who dropped out. He was criticized for that, for being avowedly pro-Russian. I mean, Scott has made no bones about it, but also for his criminal record, and he was wrongly called a pedophile. It's depressing. And, it's such an important issue that I care a lot about. You care a lot about. We talk about it every week. And it is true that we are closer to nuclear war than at any time in my lifetime. I was born a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we've not gotten this close to sending missiles to Russia as this. So, yeah. And it was tiny turnout. No coverage of it by the media, which was predictable. Rachel Maddow did talk about it, did make fun of it on MSNBC for about a minute and a half, and that was it. So, I'm afraid that the Ukraine war is going to go wherever the neocons who are running it want it to go. Victoria Nuland is going to have her way because American people just don't either know anything about it, or they don't care about it, or they have bought the line from the media and the government that Ukraine is totally virtuous and that this was an unprovoked attack by the Russian military last February. Unprovoked is the word that they use. Not knowing a thing about any of the history preceding February 24th of last year, including just the 2 weeks leading up to the special military operation, the invasion, in which Ukraine was massing forces on the border with Russia, preparing very likely for some sort of ground assault on Russian territory itself. But of course, that's not even the most important history. The most important history goes back to 2014, which we've talked about extensively. And I beg and plead for everyone to at least look at the Wikipedia article on the 2014 war in the Donbass, which is not, it's good enough. I mean, there is a little bit of propaganda in there, but if you read that, you will at least be hesitant in supporting Ukraine in this war. So yeah, the Rage Against the War Machine rally was, to me, I mean, Max Blumenthal says it was a success. I don't know. It doesn't seem like a success to me, but you know, I'm glad they tried it. I didn't love everything about it. I certainly didn't love every speaker, and I am not pro-Russia. And I hate the fact that it will be used. I'm sure pictures and video of the rally will be used to discredit people like you and me, who take a position not for Russia, but against arming Ukraine. And also, you know, I at least am sympathetic. I'm certainly, and I've said this, I'm sympathetic to the calls by people who lived in the Donbass for Russian intervention because they were being slaughtered. Civilians, children, women, old men were being blown up in the streets of Donetsk and Lugansk for years, 8 years, as a matter of fact. And they were the ones who called for Russia to intervene militarily to save them. So I'm very sympathetic to that. I am not sympathetic to the way the war has been conducted or the invasion has been conducted, but I do understand the initial impetus for it, and I certainly completely oppose any U.S. involvement in it at all, on either side or on any side. So yeah, it's another depressing anti-war moment. The anti-war movement has been pathetic since Vietnam. And I would say even in 2003, I went to many pretty large protests in the streets. I was in New York then. And, you know, I went to many protests that had tens of thousands of people, I think. But that all evaporated. The anti-war movement evaporated as soon as Barack Obama was elected president, because the whole left showed themselves to be interested only in opposing wars that are run by Republicans. They are opposed to Republican wars, Michael. When a Democrat does it, it's for good reasons. And of course, Obama then proceeded to bomb the living shit out of brown people all over the Middle East. And then, and then Biden's even worse. So
that was the trick that Obama played in 2008, because he was so anti the Iraq war and he had the credibility of voting against the Iraq war. But if you really paid attention to him, he criticized the Iraq war for being a stupid war that got rid of the justifications for all the smart wars that we should be running.
Yep. And as I said on the Joe Rogan show many years ago, Barack Obama wrote an article for Foreign Affairs magazine, which is a major establishment foreign policy journal, calling for, I think the name of it is Renewing American Leadership Globally, in which he just reaffirms the commitment to, maintaining America's position as the global hegemon, the ruler of the world. That's Barack Obama. That's what he called for before he ran for president. And he certainly acted like that as president. So yeah, the anti-war movement just totally disappeared, and it hasn't come back. And now I'd say in the last, really since Obama, but especially since over the last year, the left and I'd say the liberal left in this country has been the pro-war party. I mean, that's who really loves the war against Russia. That's who really wants NATO to be expanded as far as possible. And that's who is calling for regime change in Russia. You know, just naked, outright, grotesque imperialism is coming from people who used to protest things like the Iraq War and the Vietnam War. I'd actually love to see a genealogy of all the people who went to anti-Vietnam and anti-Iraq protests and see what they're saying nowadays. You know, I mean, I kind of know what they're saying, but yeah, it's just depressing. I don't know.
Yeah. So the dissident right in those circles, they pretty much, especially after Charleston and January 6th, always say that any attempt to meet IRL in real life is basically counterproductive in the modern times. It's an example for a bad photo op to completely smear the movement. Charleston and January 6th were just complete excuses for federal crackdowns on free speech and free assembly.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sort of glad I was never asked to participate in Rage Against the War Machine, because I didn't want to for various reasons, but I also mostly because I just didn't think it was going to amount to anything, and it was going to be used against me and against everyone who participated in it. And that's exactly what's going to happen. It's already happening. There's going to be, you don't think they're going to use every time someone from that rally gives a speech somewhere or makes the news, you don't think you're going to see a picture of them with the Russian flag behind them? I mean, Scott Horton, who's devoted his whole life to the anti-war cause and is very much not pro-Russian. Scott made it really clear. And in fact, I don't think he's sympathetic enough to the Russian side. He's not at all sympathetic to the Russian side. I mean, the Russian flag was hanging behind his head too. And that's going to be used against him to discredit not just him, but, people who have been on his show, right? Because guilt by association is the favorite trick of political people. And so they're going to say, oh, so-and-so has a point about the Ukraine war being a bad idea, but he was on Scott Horton's show, and here's a picture of Scott Horton with the Russian flag behind him. That's what's going to happen. So, and this, unfortunately, also those of us who have our take on the Ukraine war, have this take on the Ukraine war, that position has attracted some bad, nasty, weird people. Like the LaRouche people are back. I didn't know they still existed. I mean, they used to have like these bizarre tables in front of Columbia when I was going there. Like they were always in university towns, and they would table us and like talk, and they were just utterly psycho looking. But they were pretty prominent. In fact, I think at least one LaRouche person spoke at the rally.
They're not as bad as vegans, though.
No. Well, vegans, I mean, no, I don't want to say anything. Vegans, I love vegans. They're great people. And actually, I've had some outstanding vegan meals. That vegan chefs have to be extremely creative, since they don't use anything that tastes good. So they have to put things together in a very interesting way, and they do. So the LaRouches are around, and then you have these pro-Russian nationalists who I don't want anything to do with. I mean, again, I'm sympathetic to them. Like Alexander Dugin, who was on my show, is one of those people, but he lives in Russia, and he's got every right to be a Russian nationalist, but it's a little strange. And over here, and actually I think he has been critical of Putin and critical of the Russian government many times. And that's why he's never met Putin, by the way. People think that Alexander Dugin like runs the show.
But he was critical to the right of Putin, and Putin has to moderate to him a lot of times.
That's correct. Yeah. As I understand it. I'm not really privy to that stuff, or but yeah, that's what I've been told, or I've heard that Putin is like a moderate kind of pussy compared to a lot of the nationalists in Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't love the people who are completely uncritical of Putin. And I would say Scott Ritter is one of those people, even though I think Scott is very brilliant. And I've learned so much about the war and about Russia and about Ukraine and NATO from him. But he's totally I've never heard him say one negative word about Vladimir Putin or the Russian government or this operation or the war or the invasion. And that's not who I am. I don't want to be associated with that. And unfortunately, that's what happened. So, you get people who spoke at this frickin' rally are going to be associated with hardcore Russian nationalists, with Lyndon LaRouche, with there was also some actual neo-Nazis showed up. I mean, like 2 or 3. This guy Matthew Heimbach, who was like this big neo-Nazi a few years ago. And
he's from India. He's one of our guys, I think. Yeah.
Right. What's it called? The Workers' Party or something like that?
I forget, but he was bothering one of our bookstores when that was open a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So he showed up to this. Thanks a lot. It's big help. Big help to the cause. There were also several Soviet flags, which was weird. Yeah, I don't even know what that means. So I'm glad I wasn't there. And I don't know. Apparently there's going to be like a competing rally in a month that's being led by the Answer Coalition, which is this old Marxist-Leninist group that used to always dominate all the anti-war protests. They're really good at getting permits for marches, and so they end up being the leaders of these anti-war protests. They were outright pro-Saddam back in the day, in 2003. I mean, they said that it wasn't just, they weren't just opposed to the war, they were pro-Saddam Hussein, which was similar, during the Vietnam War movement. That was, and I think I may have said this here, but that was kind of one of the original splits within the anti-Vietnam War movement. Was there were a significant portion of the left, like the hardcore Marxist left in this country, in the United States, were not opposed to the war. They were actually for North Vietnam and the Viet Cong winning, and because they were communists, and so that these were their comrades fighting the United States empire. And that's not me. I'm not into that, and I don't think I would actually. It's a question though, right? Would you join together with people like that to oppose a war like Vietnam or Iraq or Ukraine? It's tricky. I don't actually know the answer. I've thought about this before. Pat Buchanan once put one of my articles on his website, on the front page, on the front of his website, like 10 years ago. And I didn't do anything about it. And I'm not even sure I should do anything about it, because I don't hate Pat Buchanan, but I mean, I've read his books and it's kind of racist, I don't know.
You're telling me that an 80-year-old Irish Catholic hardcore right-winger has some racist tendencies?
Right. Yeah. And again, I don't even care. Like, it's not like, I mean, I care, but I'm not outraged by it. I just don't want to be associated with that. And it's a very bad reason to oppose wars. The old racist argument against U.S. imperialist wars is, and this goes back to the 19th century, this goes back to the Spanish-American War, the segregationists in this country were opposed to the Spanish-American War and the American Empire in general, because wars abroad lead to mixing with the other races, with the inferior brown races. If you send our troops over to the Philippines, they're going to end up cohabitating with some Filipinas, and they're going to bring their Filipino half children back to the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, for racist reasons, they've opposed the American imperialism for more than 100 years, and they've been very consistent. I'm talking about the actual real segregationist racists in this country. They have been opponents of American imperialism from the get-go. They have better anti-imperialist credentials than the entire left and even most libertarians. What are you going to do with that, though? Are you going to march down the street with them, arm in arm? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, it's a tough question. I mean, if you're an anti-communist, and there's many anti-communists watching this right now and listening to it, would you, and this is more relevant because this is usually what happens, right? Would you march arm in arm with communists against the war or a war? I don't know. It's really hard. I mean, I'm talking about Stalinist, serious, capital C, capital P, Communist Party communists. I'm talking about pro-Soviet communists, people who would put you in a gulag, no problem, for your aberrant ideas. Would you march with them? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure who gets at this, but oftentimes, especially watching protests now, organized protest seems like it's just a public demonstration of impotence.
Yeah, I suppose. The biggest protest I've ever been to, and I used to go to them a lot, especially when I was in college, was a pro-choice march this would have been like in the 80s, mid 80s. And it was at that time, it was the largest political rally in the history of the United States.
Well, the March for Life that happens every year is usually the biggest political protest in the United States.
This was bigger. This was 1 million people. We filled the mall, the entire mall in DC was filled.
I'm gonna look up. I think the March for Life might have cracked 1 million a couple times.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as of the mid 80s, though, this was known as the biggest. Yeah. But yeah, and it felt really, really powerful. And I remember saying at the time to someone I was with at that rally, I said, there's no way the Supreme Court will ever overturn Roe because of this, because there are too many people who will come into the streets if they do. Well, I was proved wrong. I said that for a long time. I said the Supreme Court will not overturn Roe because they're afraid of public protests in response to that.
I looked it up. 2022 was 650,000 for the March for Life. Okay. But it's been going on every year since Roe versus Wade, Okay. And I remember back after the Parkland shooting, There was a gun control protest, very, very organized, Soros funded or whatever, called March for Our Lives. And that name was specifically chosen to detract from the March for Life, which was much bigger, but media never covers the March for Life.
Soros doesn't play around, man.
Yeah, he's smart.
God.
He knows people don't read.
I got to tell you, like, every time I hear about some little like anti-racist organization, you know, every damn time I look it up, and sure enough, there's one of Soros's foundations in the donor list. He really, I mean, what the right wing has been saying about Soros is totally correct. And people need to like, now, does that necessarily mean that he's bad? That what he's doing is bad? I mean, I think mostly he is doing bad things, and really bad things in Eastern. Actually, you know who's the major cause of the war in Ukraine is George Soros, for funding the Color Revolution in Ukraine, which was anti-Russia, anti-Putin, an attempt to destabilize and replace the regimes in Eastern Europe and especially Russia. That was George Soros funded that stuff with the CIA. And that was the beginning. That was the very beginning of the rift between Putin and the West, was the Color Revolution led by Soros. He's amazingly, I mean, he is truly behind most left-wing activity. He is funding, at least in part, most left-wing activity. I mean, activism. It's quite something. And you're not allowed to say that because you're anti, oh God.
Yeah. Well, Media Matters. Yeah. If the Media Matter, if we ever get big enough, Media Matters is going to clip this up, and Soros automatically means, ooh, those people. Yeah.
What I just said is not anti-Semitic, YouTube, because I didn't even know George Soros was Jewish.
Well, he also collaborated with the Nazis.
Maybe, allegedly. I don't know. Is that really true?
Yeah. I mean, he talked about, what was it, like turning in people in his village or something. Like he is a Jew who survived the Holocaust, and he did so in a way, so like Gone with the Wind, right? Scarlett survives the Civil War, and it's only because of her horrible moral character and her willingness to rob, cheat, and steal at every moment that she is able to survive such a horrible circumstance.
Right. Well, is she a sellout to the Confederacy? Does she sell out the Confederacy?
I don't think she does necessarily. No, she just exploits her fellow citizens.
Makes you wonder what George Soros is all about. His son runs the show now, I think. So that's who we need to be talking about. But it's just so frustrating. We're not allowed to say anything about Soros because it's coded as anti-Semitic, and then you just get called anti-Semitic. I mean, if you say, because it's so similar to the old anti-Semitic tropes, talking about some Jew who's financing everything. Well, it's true. I mean, but him being Jewish seems irrelevant to me. That's the thing. I mean, that's where the right screws up. It's like, what does it matter that he's Jewish? It matters that he's funding these things, and he has these particular politics that are, I think, and on race, it's terrible. It's all this sort of stoking fears about racism, and it sort of it promotes racism, of course. Yeah. Because
I didn't know he was Jewish until Media Matters told me he was.
Oh, right. Yeah. I didn't either. I mean, actually true. I didn't either. I mean, I knew about Soros for years before I knew he was Jewish. And it was when someone criticized him and that person was called an anti-Semite. I was like, oh, really? He's Jewish. Yeah. He's responsible for largely responsible for America's obsession with race these days. Because that's every organization he funds does that, says that race is the most important thing in a person, and race is the most important issue, and racism is everywhere, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, so Roger Waters, anti-Semite, virulent anti-Semite. If you listen to Pink Floyd, you're a bad person.
Right.
And now our favorite children's author, Roald Dahl, is also an anti-Semite, apparently.
Lord of mercy. Well, he actually was, but that's fine.
Well, all great artists are, and it's just something you have to accept.
Right. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt was a total anti-Semite. So was Eleanor Roosevelt. Take that, liberals.
Every American in the 1930s and 40s was.
Yeah, certainly every upper class American. Yeah.
Yeah. So my favorite children's publication, Time Magazine, wrote some wrote a couple articles about this. This was actually from back in the day. The one I'm sharing right now, the first time that this controversy sputtered up was like 2018. I think the British Mint tried to mint a commemorative coin, but they said he was too anti-Semitic to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then now Puffin Publishing, which is Penguin Publishing's children's division, has hired sensitivity trainers, sensitivity experts, that whole racket, to comb through his books and, you know, call fat people something other than fat. You know, Augustus Gloop wasn't ugly and fat and disgusting. He was, I don't know, heavy set or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this the first time something like this happened, I believe, was with Huckleberry Finn, right? And they about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and they
Mark Twain, and
Mark Twain. They took out the
Huckleberry
N-word.
Finn and his friend Jim.
But all they did, as I understand it, is they, with the new edition of Huckleberry Finn, they just, as I think, they just took out the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, the N-word appears in Huckleberry Finn like hundreds of times or dozens of times, but that's all. And, you know, that was bad enough. I mean, that's terrible, but at least there's something understandable about that. And at least it's sort of rational in a way. I'm totally opposed to it. Don't get me wrong, but like, at least there is an inner logic that I can sort of respect. But this, we're not allowed to say fat anymore. What? We're not, and ugly too. Ugly was taken out of Roald Dahl, right? You can't call people ugly or fat even when you're describing a fictional character?
Well, dude, Roald Dahl's author of Willy Wonka. I mean, this is right-wing extremism, you know, because he says that being fat essentially and ugly is a sign of Augustus Gloop's inner immorality, and that if he took care of himself and that if he was a good person, he would be pretty and attractive and fit like the rest of us.
Well, here's the thing. People on the right are heavier than people on the left. Although people on the right are prettier than people on the left. So I don't know what to do with this. It's part of this. I mean, Jordan Peterson would have a lot to say about this, right? Because this represents what's been going on in our culture for the last about 10 years, and that really accelerated in the last 5 to 6 years, which is the introduction of therapeutic thinking in politics. So we're supposed to think about politics and talk about politics as if we were in a therapy session. So we identify the people who have made us feel bad, and we don't talk about the things that did make us feel bad in specific terms, because words can hurt us. And, you know, which is true. Like, if I were a shrink, a psychologist, I would understand that words do hurt. I mean, you know, your parents do say things to you that do hurt and do some sort of psychological damage. But of course, I don't think I need to tell this audience this, but, you know, that's also part of being human, and it's part of growing up, and it's part of engaging in the world. You're going to come into conflict with other people who do not like you and will call you names. And you have to learn how to deal with that. And instead, what we are being told is you should just, you know, black people in particular, I guess now it's fat people and ugly people too. They need to be protected like children from words. I mean, that's how we treat, if I saw someone calling a child fat or ugly, I would yell at them and I would tell them not to. I would ban that. I would say you cannot use those words with a kid because they are unequipped to deal with it, and they don't know how to respond, and it's going to stay with them for their whole lives, probably, or very long. It will do some damage to them. But we don't do that with adults. At least we didn't until now. And so now all of us are being treated like children. And this is what Jordan Peterson has been talking about. It's one of the few things I agree with him on. He calls it the feminization of culture. It's the introduction or reintroduction of a matrifocal or matriarchal culture, right? Where we think about politics the way that mothers think about their family.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson would call it a what's the word? Like a actualization of the archetypical tyrannical mother,
Right.
the all-devouring, all-consuming Oedipal mother. Yeah.
Well, but she's also overly protective.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Of some of her children.
Hmm.
Right.
Well, it's the protectiveness that makes her devour them.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's just, and Roald Dahl is my favorite author of young adult fiction. He was my favorite author when I was a kid and a young adult. And I've read most of his books, and I've read several of them many
Well, that's because
times.
you're a bad person. You're an anti-Semite. That's why you like those books.
Yeah, and that's why I hate my mother, because she's Jewish.
Yeah.
Whoops, that's a little weird one, but
Mhm.
yeah, no, yeah. So Danny, Champion of the World, by the way, Roald Dahl book, no one's ever heard of, no one's ever read. That's my favorite Roald Dahl book. I strongly recommend it. It's a beautiful book about, and there's nothing supernatural in it. It's unlike Roald Dahl's books in that way. It's a beautiful story about a boy and his dad who live together in this caravan, like this train car. They go on adventures, and it's really awesome. Danny, Champion of the World. James and Giant Peach, Charlie and Chocolate. I mean, I love all those books, and I think they're beautifully written and magical, and make me feel good. And I am really pissed about this one.
Mhm.
Really, it's beyond disgusting. We can't call people, we can't use the words even ugly or fat.
It's one thing to say in real life, but like, let's say I'm reading a book, right? I'm reading a book, and all right, I come across a word that scares me. Here's what I can do. Problem's over.
Right. Because an adult knows that.
Yeah.
An adult, you know that you have that option.
Yeah. It's not an actual person there. You know, we're dealing with fiction here.
Yeah. And this started in the UK, right? The UK, someone in the UK is doing this.
Yeah. I mean,
British thing?
Roald is British. Is Penguin British? Is Penguin
Well,
Publishing British?
they have British offices. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know where it originated. I have a feeling it originated in the UK. You know, they're worse on a lot of stuff than American liberals are. I mean, they are hyper sensitive about certain things, and especially about fatness and ugliness. There was been a lot of controversy about ads in the tube stations that featured like attractive women in swimsuits or whatever. This was like a national outrage, and privileging the skinny and being fat phobic and all that. I mean, they talk about this even more than we do, this kind of stuff.
Well, that's because British people are hideous and disgusting and fat.
Well, I mean, I have always wondered why it is that when I lived in London for a year, I didn't see a single woman I found attractive. I'm just saying, I need an explanation for that.
Oh, dude, in Patton, the movie Patton, George C. Scott plays General Patton. Yeah, he's speaking in Britain after the World War II, and he has a line about that where it's like, "Oh, Britain is known for its beautiful women," and then it pans to just the ugliest women you've ever seen in your life in that movie.
Well, what's really weird, and this is why it's inexplicable, is that that's not true for women in Scotland and Ireland or Wales. Like, I see lots and lots of Scottish and Welsh and Irish women I think are attractive, but
that's because
the English
Scots, the British, I mean, the Scots, the Welsh, and the Irish are noble, beautiful people, and the horrible colonizers of the English are the ugly and immoral ones.
That's right.
Who took them over? Yeah,
it's that bad imperialist karma coming back to bite them. Yeah, making all their women ugly. The men, I think, are probably more attractive, and I know that their accent, gets them lots of action. American women love that, but it seems to me like British men are more attractive, and I think this is a subject we should devote like a whole podcast episode to.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a subversive right-wing thing that being the colonizer is good for a man, but I don't know.
Yeah. So the British, their culture is fucked in some ways worse than ours is on these issues. They're also, by the way, absolutely hysterical about Ukraine. I mean, they are loony about Ukraine, and there are multiple British politicians who have called for boots on the ground for NATO countries to send soldiers in. Boris Johnson is probably the number one cheerleader for Zelensky and the Ukraine regime. And he's the one who allegedly probably stopped the peace process in last March. As soon as they were sitting down in Turkey they were on the verge of having a peace agreement in which the Donbass would go to Russia, and in exchange, Putin would pull out the troops. Johnson immediately got on a jet and flew down and told Zelensky, no, sir, you're not going to do that. No peace for you. We will not support you if you have a peace deal with Putin. So keep fighting, and we'll keep sending in the guns. Yeah, so the British culture, I don't know exactly what that's about, except maybe just, I don't know. I mean, because Britain was, of course, allied with the Soviet Union in World War II, very famously and very effectively. I don't know. They got some weird thing. I mean, maybe it's just from living in Europe. Europeans generally are more scared of Putin and somehow think that he's going to invade their country.
Yeah.
And there's just no, I mean, outside the Baltics, outside of the former Soviet republics, there is just zero evidence that he has any interest in going into any country. Plus, he would have no way to do that, but he just has no interest in doing that. He's interested in Russian people and where they live. They don't give a shit about the Brits or the French or the Swiss. Just so strange. I mean, like, people just, and they always drop this whenever they talk about Putin. It's like, oh, and who knows where he'll go next if he's not stopped now. He's not going to go anywhere. He's never said anything about any other country outside of the immediate Soviet sphere. My goodness. You're going to say something?
Oh, well, that's the lingering myth of World War II, right? Hitler wanted to take over the world. Hitler wanted to take over Britain, and Putin's the new Hitler in their eyes.
And here's the thing, right? Even Hitler wasn't Hitler.
Yep.
Hitler did not want to take over the world. He didn't even want Western Europe. He was forced to take Western Europe as a defensive measure because the Brits had been sending in troops by the tens of thousands into Belgium right along the border with Germany. So he had to stop them from having landing bases in Western Europe from which to attack Germany. That's why he went into Western Europe. And he never had any interest. He had only interest in Poland and Western Russia, which of course was historically, he believed, Germanic, from the Teuton, possessed by the Teuton tribes, etc. Yeah, it's a total myth. And there's, I think, one single serious historian of Nazi Germany who says that Hitler wanted to conquer land outside of Eastern Europe. Every other historian who's written about this, and that we're talking about hundreds of historians, and I'm one of them, we all agree that Hitler had no intention, no desire, no interest in that. Just like Putin. It is ridiculous. Even Hitler wasn't Hitler.
Go to unregisteredacademy.com, take our World War II course, where you realize and learn that Neville Chamberlain was right.
Yep. Yes, he was. He was. The great villain, the great appeaser, was absolutely right, at least about Hitler's intentions. So yeah. Yeah. And
now that you're bringing it up, could a lot of this be seen as Winston Churchill's fault for rearming after World War I?
Oh, I mean, much of what happened in the 20th century is Winston Churchill's fault. One of the great top 10 mass murderers of all time, did a whole bunch of stuff, including the blockade of Germany in 1939, which trapped all the Jews inside the Third Reich, making it impossible to rescue them, and then also denying them entry into the United Kingdom, basically ensuring that the Holocaust happened. That's what Churchill and Roosevelt did by blockading Germany and not allowing the Jews to leave and not giving them anywhere to go. But yeah, and then rearming after World War I. Yes, of course. I mean, the Brits, the Allies, they dismembered Germany. They cut it up into various pieces, gave pieces to these brand new countries like Czechoslovakia and Poland, which had just were created. And all of a sudden, you're a German living in the Sudetenland, or in the Rhine, and all of a sudden you now belong to this other brand new country out of the blue, and you can't even, maybe you won't be allowed to travel to visit your family who live, right across the border now. And I mean, and left, right, and center, and this is the most important thing about German history, I think, modern German history, is that communists and Nazis and liberals and conservatives all hated that, and they hated what the Allies did to them. They were absolutely unified in that, all the way up until World War II. So Hitler had very fertile ground to organize within. He had a lot of German people who were rightly furious, outraged about what had happened to their country after World War I with the Versailles Treaty. Yeah. So Hitler wasn't Hitler, and Putin certainly isn't Hitler either.
The Rumble chat blew up once we started talking about Hitler. So for the first time, we've got people chatting about, just chatting up in Rumble. Rumble's been growing every time.
Oh, cool. Good.
Yeah. And I know we say some bad stuff about YouTube and Google, who owns YouTube, but I do want to say this about YouTube. They and Google, they understand the value of art. There is some of the most transgressive stuff that you could ever find anywhere is still on YouTube. The David Allan Coe country album that was only available through porno magazines and biker magazines
Really?
is still on YouTube. And I feel like that's like the line to draw. There's that. And then the most violent and shocking horror movie ever, right? Come and See, 1985, Russian made, is on YouTube. It's on YouTube for free.
Wow.
The Google Corporation understands the importance of art, and if something has artistic merit, if it's an album, if it's a movie, they will keep it up there out of respect for art, I think.
No.
And
Not out of respect to art? No.
Well,
you think the people at YouTube respect art?
I think so. I think
they respect advertisers.
I think they respect information, maybe. They're just like, like if something is a work of art, it had an impact on the world and it should be cataloged. I think they respect that.
I don't.
Okay.
I think they're just corporate executives who care only about advertisers and the bottom line and about pleasing the government, doing what the government wants them to do. They're very worried about that, but not out of principle. Just they're worried that the government will shut them down or regulate them or something. And that's why they do all the censorship. Same with Twitter and Facebook, by the way.
Yep.
I don't even think those people are like hardcore Democrats who did all this stuff because they're liberals. I mean, I know they're liberals, but I don't think that's why they censor people like us.
Well,
it's because,
yeah.
I mean, they're afraid because the government came to them and said, we're going to fuck you up if you don't censor these people. And Twitter and Facebook went back home and said, and Google and said, geez, I guess we better. Otherwise, the government's going to censor us for us.
Yeah, fair enough. The tech CEOs in Silicon Valley does have a hippie element and an anarchist element to it at the beginning that did get corrupted and made strange bedfellows. But everybody out there who makes this point, James Corbett makes this point, that the Library of Alexandria, which is the internet, is on fire. And if there's anything you like on the internet or anything you think is important, download it on a hard drive immediately.
Gotta drop his name yet again. Almost every episode. Jack Mason of the Perfume Nationalist. He's the one who's been saying that for years. He's been saying
buy physical media. Is what he's been saying. Yeah.
If you like a movie or a book, buy the physical copy of it and keep it because what happened to Roald Dahl and Mark Twain will happen to it eventually.
Yeah. If you want to tell your kids that Augustus Gloop was fat, you're going to have to buy an old edition and you're going to have to buy it now.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. I don't have the space. I used to have close to 1,000 books when I was in grad school and when I was a professor, and I got rid of almost all of them because you just don't need them anymore. But this is now a reason, unfortunately, to keep those big, heavy, awkward books around.
Yeah, and having a library is dignified as opposed to having a bunch of Funko Pops.
What's wrong with Funko Pops?
I don't know. If you like Funko Pops, I'm sorry.
I'm not even sure what it is.
They're like bobbleheads.
Oh, right. Yeah. I love them. Better than books.
Yeah. Okay. But on YouTube, there are several great works of Russian cinema. I would just look up the director, Tarkovsky.
Yes.
And empathize with the Russian people and see that they're still human beings, because there's for free on YouTube a lot of great works of Russian cinema.
The banning, the Russophobia, the racism, it is straight up racism against Russians, and the banning of Russian culture in the West has been one of the most grotesque elements of this war. And it's just remarkable that liberals can do that and not even think about it. I mean, straight up racism, straight up xenophobia. And then I don't know, what do you even call like banning Dostoevsky? What is that? I don't even know what that is. Just Philistinism? I mean, just stupidity? I don't know, but that's what's been going on. And Russians are not allowed to participate in cultural institutions like ballets and operas. And it's just, even if they haven't said anything about the war. Or Putin.
Yeah, and if you want to be a Russian in public life at all outside of Russia, you have to make these public anti-Putin statements. If you're an athlete or if you're a performer, it's right. Horrible. Yeah,
you got to wear the Ukraine flag if you want to sing opera.
Yeah.
Yep.
So here's how art ties into foreign policy right here. You got NATO's actual public Twitter account. They had this journalist. Sorry, my internet's slow, especially when live streaming. But they had this journalist, always been a journalist, blah, 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 Pablo's story. And they go through Pablo's story. Let me get to tweet number 9 in this thread. Dies from cringe in the response. But right here, Ukraine is hosting one of the great epics of this century. We are Harry Potter and William Wallace, the Na'vi and Han Solo. We're escaping from Shawshank and blowing up the Death Star. We are fighting with the Harkonnens and challenging Thanos. So this Ukrainian journalist sees his fight as young adult fiction.
Well, it's not just him. It's not him. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Yep.
Is talking like this, which tells you a lot, I think, about American and I guess Western European culture, in that many of us here think through the lens of movies. We perceive the world through the movie narratives and the plots and the characters, and that's how we see the world, right? And you know this. I mean, we all know people who do this kind of literally. The cosplaying is just one part of that. But I mean, we think about morality through, how these movies have taught us. It's part of the infantilization and maybe the feminization of Western culture, which I think has been going on. Right. I mean, and I've been talking about it a lot. It's something that really bothers me, and I try not to be moralistic about it, but I guess I can't help it. I just don't like it. And I'd rather talk to grownups. But the NATO understands things. I mean, I'm sure they hire very expensive PR people to do their Twitter account, and they know that that's what gets Americans going. They know that they think about good and evil in terms of what Hollywood presents.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And
this is why art is literally war, in my opinion. I think this war is happening because Americans have such a juvenile understanding of morality, and they have very juvenile understandings of history because of that. And any sophisticated and complex and morally strong piece of art is banned, just like Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is too extreme. Children's authors from too long ago are too extreme for children to learn. And, your morality is ingrained in you as a child, whether you want it to or not. And the stories we tell children is this morality. And that's the war. And those stories are told through art, and you got to hold that thing sacred to you. You got to really hold your stories sacred.
We're a nation of children.
Yeah.
And becoming more and more so. It seems like it's becoming more and more so the case. Yeah. I mean, men dress like boys. When's the last time you saw a man wearing a suit? I mean, really, everyone think about it. When's the last time you saw a man wearing a suit in public? I
saw a picture of Elon Musk meeting with Gavin Newsom, and they were both wearing suits, but they weren't wearing ties.
Right. And that's the most dressed up you'll see anybody. And it'll only be politicians and CEOs like that who will wear suits. I mean, pretty much. You just don't see men dressing up at all. And instead, you see them wearing shorts and T-shirts and baseball hats and sneakers every day. And I do that too. But my God, people, can we just try to grow? But it's not so much how people dress, it's how they think. That's the problem. And yeah, there's a very juvenile view of the world, not just of history and morality, but they see the world like children do. Very moralistic, very black and white, binary, Manichaean. There's good and evil, and who's good and who's evil has already been assigned. They know that automatically. And they walk around the world pointing out what's good and what's bad and screaming about what's good and bad, hysterical. There's a lot of hysteria. I mean, we've had one hysteria after another. There've been serial hysterias over the last since 2011. And since Obama sent out that letter to the colleges saying that they had to prosecute rape generally. I mean, differently. They had to expand their definition of sexual assault to include, basically everything. Essentially treating women like children, right? That was the beginning of this new phase. And then we had, race hysterias, then COVID hysterias, and I mean, every hysteria. Putin hysteria is the newest one. And that is childlike. That's what children do. You're just hysterical all the time, right? You see something that's a little troubling to you and start screaming about it, have a meltdown, cry. That's the difference between children and adults. We learn how to process things when we're adults. We learn how to think through things so that we can sort of resolve them without just collapsing under the weight of the emotions that we're experiencing. Mm-hmm. So I don't even know. This is such a massive cultural problem. I don't know how it's going to change or whether it's going to change. I don't know what to do about it except just rant about it like I do in public, like here. I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts about like how we can change that huge cultural movement?
Promote more complex, more advanced, better pieces of art. That's all it is. I think that's how you save the world. That's how Jack is trying to save the world.
Yeah.
If you read like a Dostoevsky novel, or if you read any novel, honestly, if you have the long attention span to watch something more than a 3-minute YouTube video or a Marvel movie with cuts every half second, then you are able to deal with the complexities of the real world.
Yep. Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. I guess, that's all you can do. Make art, God damn it.
Yeah.
And make art that is make art that's not for kids.
Yeah. Well, no. Show kids more transgressive art, I think. Like your kids can deal with it.
Sure. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the immense popularity of young adult fiction among mostly, adults, but mostly women. That's a big part of this too. That's really troubling. Like Harry Potter. I mean, the number of adult people who have read that book and not just, it's fine to read it, but to like organize your whole life around it, and to think about the world through Harry Potter. Goodness gracious.
Well, okay. We've been talking about the whole generational thing, and I think Gen X parents and late boomer parents invented helicopter parenting, right? And this is what
Gen X did. Is my people. Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah.
And this is what Jonathan Haidt points out as the cause of all of our ills in society and why Gen Z is so miserable is because they were helicopter parented, and they were never ever allowed to play freely. They were never allowed to bump on their knee and get a scrape. They never had unsupervised play, and they were never challenged ever intellectually. And we're reaping that right now, I think.
No, it's exactly right. But I'm talking about Gen X adults are also infantilizing themselves. They're reading young adult fiction. They're reading children's novels. I mean, that never, when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s even, that was a really weird thing to do for a grown-up to read young adult fiction. Like that was embarrassing. And now they're proud of it. They love it. Can't get enough of it.
Oh, man, that's what's so great about the classics, right? Is that like something like Mark Twain is something that both grandpa and the 10-year-old can read at the same time and get something out of it. And yeah, I guess there was an obsession with youth, and there still is. And I think Gen Xers and anybody obsessed with pop culture is going to have this terror of getting older, when you should really see it as an opportunity to grow and to enter a new dignified phase of your life where you're more capable in different ways. And a lot of people I see are just terrified of getting old, and it hinders them in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think also a lot of people don't want to be challenged by art. Most people do not want to be challenged in any way at all by the art that they consume. They don't want to hear bad words. They don't want to hear ideas that are troubling, that challenge their worldview. And so, children's books and children's movies are great because they're never going to be challenged. They're never going to be offended. They're never going to hear anything that's troubling. And I don't understand why they're not bored with it though. When I watch a Marvel movie, I mean, I am bored within 5 minutes. And I used to love those comic books when I was a kid. So like, I know all about those characters. I was an X-Men fan, like way before you were born. So I'm ready. Like I'm cool. I could be totally into it. I'm not, I'm very open, but they're so goddamn boring. I don't
He's gonna
understand.
get the girl at the end, and that's
Beyond,
the bad
yeah,
guy. No complexity in the bad guy at all.
yeah, none.
Yeah.
No complexity in anybody, really.
Mhm.
And no serious character development, no real like analysis of the characters, no psychological like unfolding of the characters, none of that. Yeah, I don't get it.
Mhm.
It's all a morality play, right? Good versus evil.
Well,
Very simple stuff.
simple one, yeah.
Very simple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I'm sorry to be talking about this all the time. I wish I didn't. I hate being a snob. I hate being
Mhm.
moralistic. I hate being elitist about this stuff, but I gotta be. Someone's got to do it. Someone's
Mhm.
got to stand up. Camille Paglia, I think she was like the first to notice this, and she was talking about how men dress like boys about 10 years ago, and I was like, oh, she got a point there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no. Paglia she was a canary in the coal mine on a lot of things, and
Mhm.
yeah, it takes a weirdo to notice things like that.
She's
Uh,
definitely that.
yeah. Brilliant though, absolutely brilliant. So the way this ties into well, okay. Well, modern political presentation, let's say that. The
Okay.
politics that we are shown is also very, very dumb. The Trump versus Biden thing happening, where Trump is, I put it in the description. It's a tale of two photo ops, right?
Yeah.
Biden goes to Ukraine again to meet with his best friend Zelensky, while Trump hands out water bottles at East Palestine, Ohio, and buys everybody Big Macs.
Did you watch are we gonna watch anything? Because
Uh,
the Trump speech in East Palestine was quite something.
I didn't see that speech, but I wanted to point out that a lot of people have been pointing out. Joy Behar on The View pointed this out in a very clumsy and dumb way, I think. But Anomaly on Twitter pointed this out in a much more nuanced way, that Trump is kind of partially responsible for deregulating the trains that got derailed. And he
Maybe.
hired, let me share this. He hired Mitch McConnell's wife.
Oh.
If you were, yeah, he hired Mitch McConnell's wife to be the transportation secretary,
Oh.
and he rolled back some regulations.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wait, Elaine Chao?
Yep.
That's McConnell's wife?
Yep.
I forgot that, or I didn't know that. Wow. That's something else. Well, it's unclear actually whether the deregulation had anything to do with this or would have stopped, or if he hadn't deregulated, whether it would have stopped this. I don't think so. I don't know.
I'm for deregulation regardless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
Yeah.
Even if it does kill everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if there is a nuclear meltdown and everyone dies.
Team
No.
Dangerous Freedom over here.
Yeah, but I mean, I've heard about this, and it sounds like it's not clear that the deregulation was relevant to this. But what I saw in that speech, so have you noticed, is this true? It seems like Trump in the last 6 months or so has gotten like his narcissism is like completely out of control now. Like he can't stop talking about how great he is.
Well, I mean, he's getting older, and probably he's edging up to Biden's age when Biden ran 4 years ago.
And he always did that, of course,
Yeah.
but it just seems now in the last 6 months or so. And this is a good example, the East Palestine speech he just gave. I mean, I'm telling you, everyone go watch it. It's like a 10-minute speech. Like every other sentence he's talking about, and it's often irrelevant stuff. He would like inject things about himself being a great president, or I did this great thing, or I did that great thing. He went on this whole tangent that was totally unrelated to the
Well,
toxic.
he's selling himself as president. That's what he's doing, and the only way he knows how to do that is to talk about himself.
Now, I get it. I do get it. If the entire world hated everything I do, and everything I stand for, and hated every cell in my being, I could imagine being a little defensive and a little, like, prone to some self-aggrandizement in response to that. But it's not working. I don't think it's it makes you not trust the guy. I gotta say, Trump has not been looking good lately, and his attacks on DeSantis have been really juvenile and really just sort of crude and obvious. And yeah, this East Palestine speech, I was just like, dude, stop talking about yourself, man. The people's water has been poisoned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, I think 80-year-olds shouldn't be president. That's all it boils down to. I think 80-year-olds should be at home with their family who loves them, and they shouldn't be trying to convince the whole world to make them leader of the world.
Yeah. He's not 80 yet.
He's knocking on 80.
But
he'll
then
be
there's
80 in 2024.
But then there's this speech, which he also just gave, in which he does a little self-aggrandizing, but it's a pretty phenomenal thing. We got to play this. Yeah. This is huge.
You can tell me when to pause so we can go through it point by point.
Well, it's right at the beginning. This is huge.
Okay.
The big moment is, early.
World War III has never been closer than it is right now. We need to clean house of all of the warmongers and America last globalists and the deep state, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the national security industrial complex.
I'm sorry, but look at his right eye, man. Notice how it's slightly closed.
Yeah.
Like something's up, man.
Yeah. He's in pain.
One of the reasons I was president in generations who didn't start a war is that I was the only president who rejected the catastrophic advice of many of Washington's generals, bureaucrats, and the so-called diplomats who only know how to get us into conflict, but they don't know how to get us out. For decades, we've had the very same people, such as Victoria Nuland and many others just like her, obsessed with pushing Ukraine toward NATO, not to mention the State Department support for uprisings in Ukraine. These people have been seeking confrontation for a long time, much like the case in Iraq and other parts of the world, and now we're teetering on the brink of World War III. A lot of people don't see it, but I see it, and I've been right about a lot of things. They all say Trump's been right about everything. None of this excuses in any way the outrageous and horrible invasion of Ukraine.
What was I saying?
Yeah.
He's out of control. He can't stop talking about how great he is.
And what was beautiful about Trump in 2016 was that he was a symbol of vitality. And he's not that anymore. And that's no fault of his own. When you're doing the hardest job in the world for 4 years and then,
So I was wrong about the big moment. The big moment comes a little later than I thought.
Oh, okay.
He hasn't said it yet. I don't think he said it yet.
A year ago, which would have never happened if I was your president, not even a little chance. But it does mean that here in America, we need to get rid of the corrupt globalist establishment that has botched every major foreign policy decision for decades. And that includes President Biden, whose own people said he's never made a good decision when it comes to looking at other countries and looking at wars. We have to replace them with people who support American interests. Over our 4 years in the White House, we made incredible progress in putting the America Last contingent aside and bringing the world to peace. And now we're going to complete the mission. The State Department, Pentagon, and national security establishment will be a very different place by the end of my administration. In fact, just into my administration, it'll be a very different place, and it'll get things done, just like I did 4 years ago. We never had it so good. We'll also stop the lobbyists and the big defense contractors from going in and pushing our senior military and national security officials toward conflict, only to reward them when they retire with lucrative jobs, getting paid millions and millions of dollars. Take a look at the globalist warmonger donors backing our opponents. That's because they're candidates of war. I am the president who delivers peace, and it's peace through strength. There was a reason we had no conflict. There was a reason we didn't get into wars, because other countries respected us. I entirely built, all right from the beginning, rebuilt our military. It's a big reason for that. They didn't want to mess around with the United States, and now they're laughing at us. We could end the Ukraine conflict in 24 hours with the right leadership. At the end of my next 4 years, the warmongers, frauds, and failures at the senior ranks of our government will all be gone, and we will have a new group of competent national security officials who believe in defending America's vital interests above all else. Thank you very much.
Okay, I must have missed it. I think it's in the first minute, though. He says something about the State Department supporting uprisings in Ukraine. Was that? Did he not say that there?
I thought. I mean, let me see. He goes hard on Ukraine.
Complex. One of the reasons I was the only president in generations who didn't start a war is that I was the only president who rejected the catastrophic advice of many of Washington's generals.
I'm not sure if he explicitly talks about 2014, but
is the beginning clipped out?
Maybe. I think
that's the key moment. He talks about, it's a little bit indirect in what he says, but he says the State Department, I'm pretty sure he says the State Department supported uprisings in Ukraine. And he cites that as one of the main reasons for the war. He is totally right about that. Because in 2014 and before then, in 2008, the Color Revolution, as I said before, was totally supported by the CIA and Soros and the State Department. And they've done that ever since. They've been supporting the pro-West, anti-Russian factions within Ukrainian politics. And that's the major cause of this war, for sure.
Yeah, he doesn't call out. I mean, he calls out Victoria Nuland by name. So I think that's sort of.
It must have been an earlier part that got clipped out or something, because he does say that. He does say that the State Department has supported uprisings in Ukraine, which is so that's the first time any government official, any former government official, has admitted that at all. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Sorry, I guess I must have given you the wrong video, but
okay, all good.
Yeah,
man,
anyway, people can look it up. Trust me, he does say that at one point.
Okay, man, I'm sorry. I'm just reading the articles about that. I don't think he calls out it by name, but I mean, I think he says enough in there where he talks about globalists in the deep state and who he has in the State Department. I think that's enough for people following along to pay attention. But like at the same time, though, this is the guy who hired Mike Pompeo and John Bolton on his cabinet when he had the chance, you know?
Oh, well, let's talk about that. Yes. So Trump on Ukraine has sucked. He has been almost as bad as Biden, by the way. So he was the first to send a large amount of weapons to Ukraine. That was during his presidency. He sent a lot of weapons to Ukraine, frontline weapons. He also imposed sanctions on Nord Stream pipeline. And he also, right after the invasion happened, I think this is last March, he said on Fox News that if he were president, he would send nuclear submarines to Russia, to the coast of Russia, and have them go up and down the coast of Russia. Nuclear submarine. That's what he said. So the guy's no good. Yeah, and you're right. And he hired all these lunatic neocons like John Bolton and others and Pompeo, who are extreme anti-Russian hawks, which, you know, made Russia rightly even more concerned about their safety and security, because these people have always been talking about regime change in Russia, which can only mean one thing, you know, it's revolution or civil war or an invasion, something very, very bad for the Russian people. So Trump is no good. And he sort of just occasionally says really great things like what he said here in the speech. And his overall orientation is certainly far better than the Democrats and the establishment Republicans on this stuff. And he does have an actual understanding of why this war is happening, why it's happened. And he blames the U.S. largely for that, which is also right on and amazing. And this is Trump at his very best. I mean, during the campaign in 2016, you know, he would say these things in his stump speeches about the U.S. complicity in all sorts of crimes against humanity. And he was very sort of unapologetic about it, unashamed of it. And this is exactly why we have the Never Trump movement. This is exactly why we had Russiagate, because the CIA and all the intelligence agencies were like, yo, you cannot do that. You are challenging. You are a threat to our very existence. because without these wars, without this empire, without these military bases all over the world, we have no job. We have no life. We have no position of power anymore. So he constituted an existential threat to that entire system. And that's why everything that's happened in the last 6 years has happened, is because Trump has said stuff like this. As mild as it is and as imperfect as it is, he is the first and only major American politician to say anything critical of the American empire itself. By the way, Bernie Sanders has never said anything like this. Bernie Sanders has never challenged the existence of the American empire whatsoever. He's just been critical of certain actions taken by the American empire, just like Obama was, who said, as you said earlier, Iraq was a bad idea because it was a stupid war, not because the United States shouldn't go to war in other countries to conquer them and control them. So Trump is clearly the only radical major politician in American history on these issues. And that's why we've gotten the whole anti-Trump hysteria. It all started with that.
Yeah, when Trump got elected in 2016, so this is when he was president-elect. So between him getting elected and inaugurated, I was optimistic because in my mind, I'm like, okay, Hillary Clinton is a known factor. Her career in politics is very well documented. She's been on the wrong side of everything her entire life, except for when she campaigned for Barry Goldwater as a kid. But
right.
But Trump was a chaotic, unknown outsider entering politics for the first time, and that was a reason for optimism. Now, as we're looking forward to 2024, I'm like, he had his chance, and he blew it. And I don't trust him to. He doesn't deserve a second chance, in my opinion, as the right wing is debating between DeSantis and Trump.
He blew it? What do you mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, just the way that it failed so spectacularly. I mean, he did okay for the first half, but he should have stolen the election from Biden, and Biden stole the election from him. If he was truly this symbol of vitality who's going to save the West, he wouldn't have not lost to Joe Biden. He would have been smart enough, and he would have listened to Steve Bannon, but he lost it.
Even if you have the entire media opposed to you, even if you have the CIA, the FBI, and most people who work for the government actively undermining you, subverting you, really? I mean, come on. They stole, not Biden, but the whole system stole it from Trump. And I'm not talking about stuffing ballots. I'm talking about ballot boxes. I'm talking about rigging the whole communication apparatus against him so that, we know what happened.
Yeah.
It's not, that wasn't his fault.
Yeah, no, he was definitely up against a lot, but
I'd say.
Yeah. He was up against literally everything in the world.
Got impeached twice.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness.
Okay, the chat's talking about Operation Warp Speed now. That's where they lost him.
And the vaccine. That's right. People, all these MAGA people, all these right wingers, they forget very conveniently that dude was responsible for the vaccine in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was him and Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro was like super MAGA guy. And, that was his idea. It was Navarro's idea. And Trump pushed it through. Trump he also pushed through the lockdowns. He made that decision. That was Trump. He's in, and, most of the right is like primarily activated around COVID now, has been for a while. But what are you talking about? Your guy is responsible for it. Most of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to show another clip of childish moralizing, shall we say?
Good.
And
need more of that
from the adults who are supposed to be in charge of us, or so we're told.
Childish moralizing is my least favorite thing.
Yeah, this was Kamala Harris at the Munich Security Conference.
She's good at it. Yeah,
and she exactly. And I think in this clip she says something way more irresponsible than Trump has ever said or tweeted in his entire life.
And there is no doubt these are crimes against humanity. The United States has formally determined that Russia has committed crimes against humanity. And I say to all those who have perpetrated these crimes and to their superiors who are complicit in these crimes, you will be held to account. In the face of these indisputable facts, to all of us here in Munich, let us renew our commitment to accountability. Let us renew our commitment to the rule of law.
Yeah.
She's scarier when she's not laughing.
Right. So I think it was Jim Jordan first brought up this point in the hearings with Victoria Nuland a few weeks ago. I think it was Jim Jordan, one of those guys. And may have been Matt Gaetz. They asked Nuland if the United States was going to try to bring Vladimir Putin to trial, was going to prosecute him for war crimes. And she said yes. And just like Kamala Harris is saying, that's what they will do. They're going to prosecute Putin for war crimes. So that precludes a peace deal. If you're going to prosecute the head of state of the belligerent for war crimes, which could result in his hanging, by the way, or a lifetime in prison, but he could get executed for this, right? How is he going to sit down with you and what then? That's part of the negotiations. So you have to go to trial for war crimes. If if we come to a deal here, they're precluding it. This is proof that they do not want peace. They do not want an end to this war, right? I mean, it's that simple, and it's utterly ridiculous. I mean, if we were to try prosecute him for war crimes, we should be prosecuting half the American government, right, for what it's done all over the world. But just Iraq alone, I mean, how many war crimes were Americans responsible for? Kamala Harris should be prosecuted for war crimes. Joe Biden most certainly should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity in general. But no, this is just, these people are crazy fanatics. They're fanatical. They're fanatical anti-Putinists. That's what they live for. They organize their whole worldview around this. They have to remove that guy because he's not playing ball with NATO.
Mm-hmm.
They need to have a compliant puppet government in Russia, and they will not stop prosecuting this war or wars against Russia generally until that happens. It is beyond barbaric and insane.
Well, I was going to ask you about, try to incorporate the postmodernism thing into this. Like, is crimes against humanity even a valid category? Like,
oh, well, there's that too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that was my whole problem with the Abu Ghraib stuff. It's people got really upset about Abu Ghraib and about the alleged torture and humiliation that was done of Iraqi prisoners in the Abu Ghraib prison. And the whole time I was just thinking, like, wait, they like drop bombs on villages and like vaporize, hundreds of children at once. Like, this is what upsets you? Like, the war itself is the problem, but it's a typical sort of dumb Western mind, that gets outraged by optics. Basically, it's because there were pictures from Abu Ghraib that people got so upset about it, right? It's like, would you rather be, have a hood put over your head and like made to stand like that guy in Abu Ghraib did, or would you rather have, the Marines mow down your whole village with machine guns? So, it's a stupid childish moralizing. There you go.
The thinking comes from that Martin Luther King quote, right? An injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. So if Putin is mowing down Ukrainians, that means that all of us are being transgressed upon.
That's right. It's exhausting to think about. Think about how much justice we'd have to be fighting for. I mean,
oh my goodness, yeah.
How much injustice we would be attacking. I mean, there's injustice everywhere all the time, according to that standard.
Yeah. Oh, what was we should have talked about this, but the story with China in World War III here. What was the story? Shoot.
China in World War III?
No, China joining the fray in Ukraine. Like,
oh, well, the Chinese foreign minister just went to Moscow.
Yeah.
And met with Lavrov, who's the foreign minister for Russia. And I think he was also going to meet with Putin. I'm not sure if that happened. But he said, the Chinese foreign minister said that the relationship with the West is over.
Yeah. And didn't Zelensky say something along the lines of, if China joins Russia, it's World War III, like it's on? Like, didn't Zelensky? I think Zelensky said something like that.
Oh, I don't know. But yeah, the scuttlebutt is that China is about to supply Russia with weapons or ammunition specifically, and that's not confirmed. I think it's quite possible. Who cares? But yeah, so, I mean, China's they've been buying oil and gas from Russia. So they have been participating in the war in that way since the beginning. Yeah, but this is what's happening. This is the big news story. We've talked about it a lot. It's the emergence of this new alliance of Russia and China and many, many other countries now. So South Africa. Oh, and then I don't know if you saw this, but Russia right now has warships off of Cape Horn in South Africa, doing naval exercises with Chinese and the Chinese and South African Navy. So South Africa is getting closer and closer and closer to Russia and China. Then you have Brazil. Lula just denounced the Ukraine war, by the way, and said they will not send any weapons to Ukraine. The government of Colombia, which is this left-wing government that was recently elected, they just came out. The vice president of Colombia just denounced the United States participating in this war, said they will not send any weapons to Ukraine. Argentina said the same thing. They will not help Ukraine. They will not send any weapons there. Then you have Saudi Arabia, you have Pakistan, you have, who else? Many different countries are siding openly with Russia and China on this. And those countries, the countries that have declared their, cooperation or friendly attitude toward Russia and China, they constitute 80% of the world's population. 80% of the world's population. BRICS and the SCO, these are the Russian-led alliances. Those countries, they make up 80% of the world's population. NATO, Western Europe, United States, that's 20%. So the majority is coming to get us.
Yeah. Before our sign off here, I was thinking more and more about, how do we save the world? Because that's why we're doing this, right? Is that we both have mommy issues and we both have this messianic complex and we need to save the world right now.
Yes.
So,
that's me.
Yeah. So Jack, part of his ideology is you have to get bored, right? It's important to get bored.
Oh, yeah.
That's the problem with everybody. You have to completely immerse yourself in the art. And the only way to do that is to get bored, to be transported to another world. And that's the problem with everybody nowadays, is that they consume 15-second TikToks and then they're bam in another world, bam in another world, bam in another world, bam in another. Like, they never actually stop and put two thoughts together and form those thoughts into a paragraph, Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. Got to do art, and got to do art that's intelligent.
Yeah.
Intelligent.
Yeah. And you got to suffer.
No, you don't have to suffer. But suffering's good, though. It's helpful. If you have suffered, you can be a good artist then.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, man, we got to go. So after every Unreported, we go to Unregistered Live. Michael and I go to Unregistered Live, which is a Zoom meeting for all of our patrons. And all you got to do to join us and hang out is go to patreon.com/unregistered, become a patron at any level, and you will get the URL, the link to the Zoom meeting where Michael and I are going right now.
Sweet. Yes. That's where we don't talk like grandmas in the room. It's
unrecorded. So people are totally free to say whatever they want. And as you'll see, if you join us, we do say whatever we want. It's quite something. Yeah.
Cool.
All right, man. Thank you.
See you on the other side.
Side.
Yeah. There we go.
Bye.
Oh, sweet.